Okay, let's unpack this. We're starting this deep dive with one of the most cynical and just persistent phrases in our culture. Nice guys finish last.
It's a very compelling statement, isn't it? Because it seems to hold a mirror up to what we think are the harsh realities of evolution.
Exactly.
I mean, if the core argument of this field is that life is driven by selfish genes, where the single-minded priority is just passing on your own genetic material,
Then ruthlessness should just win out every time.
it should. An individual who prioritizes their own survival and propagation, even if it's at the cost of others, should, in theory, outcompete the altruist every single time. Altruism, by that definition, it seems like a complete Darwinian dead end.
Right. So that's the paradox. It's clear. If evolution rewards the self-serving, selfish individual, how on earth did cooperation, trust, and genuine altruism not only survive, but actually thrive in the natural world?
Well, our source material for this deep dive, which focuses exclusively on this evolution of cooperation, it promises a technical, mathematical, and surprisingly optimistic answer to that exact question.
I like the sound of that.
Our mission today is to follow this intellectual journey that starts with basic reciprocal altruism, the simple idea of I scratch your back if you scratch mine, and takes us all the way to these complex mathematical models used to predict social behavior.
So we're tracing the argument from what Robert Trevor's foundational concept of reciprocity. We touched on that before with the grudger strategies and cleaner fish.
Exactly. We're going from that all the way to the groundbreaking work of a political scientist, Robert Axelrod, who collaborated with the renowned evolutionary biologist W.D. Hamilton.
So we're really taking this complex social thing, cooperation, and forcing it into a game, a kind of high-stakes, high-maths challenge that defines the very conditions under which niceness can actually finish first.
That's the goal.
Okay, so section 1. To get there, we first have to understand the game itself. The prisoner's dilemma, or PD. It's like an incredibly simple setup on the surface, but it's been just crucial in bridging economics, political science, and, for us, evolutionary biology.
Right. It's a conceptual model, not a physical contest. It involves two players, and each player has only two choices they can make: cooperate or defect.
And crucially, the choices are made at the same time.
Simultaneously or face down, which is critical. Neither player knows the other's decision before they lock in their own. This completely removes any possibility of, real-time negotiation or coercion.
So it forces both players to rely purely on what they perceive as their rational individual self-interest.
Exactly. And the whole dilemma only exists because of the specific, very highly structured way the rewards and punishments are assigned.
Okay, let's walk through the 4 possible outcomes. We should probably use the financial examples from the source material just to keep the ranking clear in our heads.
Yeah, the ranking is the absolute key. It's what defines the whole game.
Okay, so best collective outcome. That's mutual cooperation. We both play cooperate, and the banker pays each of us, say, $300. This is the reward for mutual cooperation, or a pretty good result for both of us.
Right, a solid outcome. Now, the worst collective outcome is mutual defection. We both play defect. In this case, the banker fines each of us $10. This is the punishment for mutual defection P. So that's a fairly bad outcome, but it's not the worst possible thing that can happen to you individually.
Okay, so that's where the other 2 outcomes come in. This is where our choices differ. So if I defect and you cooperate.
Ah, the moment of betrayal.
Right. I achieve my maximum individual score, $500. This is the temptation payoff T. And you, the unsuspecting cooperator, you get the absolute lowest score. You get fined $100. That's the sucker's payoff, S.
And of course, the mirror image exists. If you defect and I cooperate, I get the sucker's payoff, and you walk away with the temptation prize.
So, just to be crystal clear, the critical rank order that makes this a prisoner's dilemma is temptation is better than reward, which is better than punishment, which is better than the sucker's payoff.
TRPS. 500 is greater than 300, which is greater than -10, which is greater than -100. That specific rank order is what creates both the individual temptation to exploit the other person and the individual fear of being exploited yourself.
Now, the source material also mentions this secondary technical constraint that often gets overlooked, but is apparently vital for strategy stability later on. It says that the average of the temptation and sucker payoffs can't exceed the reward.
Right, so T plus S must not be greater than 2R.
Why is that little piece of math so crucial for the whole game's structure?
Well, it's essential to prevent a very specific type of strategic exploitation, especially when we get to the repeated versions of the game. So think about it. The temptation payoff, T, is really high, $500. And the sucker payoff, S, is really low, -100. If you and I came up with a strategy to just constantly alternate who defects, so I defect this round, you cooperate, next round you defect, I cooperate, and so on our average score per round would be 500 plus -100 divided by 2.
Which is 400 divided by 2. $200.
Exactly. $200.
Yeah.
And that 200 is less than the $300 we would both get if we just cooperated every time.
I see. So if that rule didn't exist and our
Yeah.
average score from alternating was, say, $400, then we just choose to do that forever.
We would, because it would be individually better than just cooperating. But that would defeat the whole purpose of mutual cooperation, which is supposed to be the best collective outcome. That constraint basically rules out a stable two-player exploitation cycle that secretly pays better than genuine cooperation.
It ensures that mutual cooperation, CC, remains the highest collective benchmark.
Precisely. It makes sure that the temptation is only really profitable if it's a one-off hit.
Okay, so let's get to the core paradox, because this is where it gets really interesting for me. We know mutual cooperation gives us $300 each. It's the best joint outcome. Yet, if the game is only played once, both of us, if we're rational, are logically compelled to choose the move that leaves us with just a $10 fine. How does that logic actually unfold?
It comes down to a thought experiment you have to run inside your own head, assuming your opponent is also rational. You have to analyze the situation just from your own selfish perspective, considering every possibility.
Okay, let's run it. I'm player A. I'm thinking through the possibility.
Okay, possibility 1. You assume I am going to cooperate. So you look at the board. If I cooperate, you have a choice. You can cooperate and get $300, R, or you can defect and get 500, T.
500 is better than 300. So my best move is defect. Check.
Okay, possibility 2. Now you assume I'm going to defect. You look at the board again. If I defect, you have a choice. You can cooperate and get hit with that $100 fine, the sucker's payoff, or you can defect and only suffer a $10 fine, the punishment.
Well, a $10 fine is definitely better than a $100 fine, so my best move is still defect.
And that's the trap.
It's so counterintuitive, because if we both know that the $300 outcome is collectively best, why does the optimal move still lead us to the $10 fine? Doesn't the very definition of rationality kind of break down here?
It breaks down the idea that individual rationality automatically leads to a collective optimum. The logic itself is flawless, but it only optimizes for the single individual right now against an unknown opponent. Since in both possible scenarios for what I might do, defect gives you a better score, defect is what's called the dominant strategy.
And since I'm rational and you're rational, we both run the same calculation in our heads.
We both arrive at the same conclusion.
We both defect. And we end up with mutual defection, the punishment outcome, a $10 fine each. So the individual pursuit of the best possible game ensures we both end up with a poor outcome.
It's the ultimate trap. And that's where the name comes from. The famous story of the two prisoners, Peterson and Moriarty, being interrogated in separate rooms. The payoffs are inverted because they're jail sentences. The goal is the shortest sentence. But the same inescapable logic compels both to betray the other, ensuring they both get stiff sentences, even though they knew that mutual silence, mutual cooperation would have gotten them out sooner.
So the dilemma really shows that in a one-off interaction where there's no history, no future, no trust, individual rationality just forces us into a bad place. The only way out, as the source points out, is if one player is a saintly sucker, willing to just cooperate and eat that $100 loss.
And evolution, as we know, certainly doesn't favor the saintly sucker.
No, it does not. Okay, so if the one-shot prisoner's dilemma is a trap designed to show the failure of cooperation, where do we find hope?
The breakthrough comes from the simplest possible change to the rules. We move from the one-shot PD to the iterated or repeated prisoner's dilemma, the IPD.
And the rule change is just that the game is played an indefinite number of times with the same two players.
That's it. But it changes the entire strategic landscape. The simple game has two strategies, cooperate or defect. The repeated game introduces a history. Every player now has a memory.
Right. And based on what happened in the last round or the last 5 rounds, they can adjust their behavior.
This allows players to develop what are called conditional strategies, rules that dictate behavior based on the opponent's past actions. You can start to build trust, you can police bad behavior, and maybe most importantly, you can start working together to win against the external banker, which in the real world is often just nature itself.
So instead of just two choices, the game now involves, potentially thousands of conditional strategies, right? From simple retaliation to really complex forgiveness mechanisms.
And this isn't just a model for human interaction. Axelrod and Hamilton really emphasize that life is riddled with iterated prisoner's dilemma games. In biology, these strategies aren't conscious decisions, they are pre-programmed rules encoded in the genes. We're looking for the strategy that is evolutionarily stable, the one that maximizes genetic payoff over many, many interactions.
The source gives a perfect biological example of this dynamic playing out in the wild. The tick-removing birds.
Right. So imagine two birds that need a partner to remove ticks from places they can't reach themselves, like the tops of their heads. From an evolutionary perspective, this action has costs, energy spent, time lost, and it has benefits. Better health, better survival.
Okay, let's break down the evolutionary payoff structure for these birds, measuring their fitness gains and losses.
Let's do it.
So mutual cooperation, CC. Both birds groom each other, removing ticks. They both get high health benefits, but they each pay a small energy cost. That's the reward. Good fitness for both.
Yeah.
Now, temptation, DC. Bird A gets its ticks removed by bird B, but then it just flies off, refuses to reciprocate. It avoids the energy cost entirely. Bird A gets all the health benefits with zero cost. That is the evolutionary jackpot. The temptation payoff, T. A very high fitness gain.
And mutual defection, DD. Neither bird bothers to groom the other. They both just remain infested with ticks. This is the punishment, P. Pretty low fitness, because they're burdened by parasites.
And finally, the worst individual outcome, the sucker's payoff, CD. Bird A spends energy removing bird B's ticks, only to be left infested itself because bird B refused to reciprocate. Bird A pays a cost and gets zero benefit. That's the sucker's payoff, S. A very low, maybe even lethal, fitness outcome.
And the rank order holds perfectly. Temptation, no cost, full benefit, is better than reward. Small cost, full benefit, which is better than punishment. No cost, no benefit, which is absolutely better than being the sucker. Full cost, no benefit.
Yeah.
Individual self-interest still dictates that cheating is the best one-shot move. Precisely. But the repetition, the fact that they'll meet again tomorrow, changes the entire calculation. The possibility of the exploited bird just terminating the interaction, or more likely, retaliating in the next round, just refusing to help bird A again, that introduces the necessary stick for cooperation to evolve.
So we're looking for the stable rule set that manages this dynamic.
Exactly. And as the source emphasizes, these are Maynard-Smithian strategies. They are pre-programmed behaviors that apply to complex animals, to simple organisms, even to computer programs. It's about the logic of the strategy, not consciousness.
Okay, so with potentially thousands of conditional strategies possible in this iterated game, the big question for Axelrod was, which one is mathematically the best? Which strategy is the most robust?
So Axelrod formalized this question by organizing a computer competition. He invited experts from all over mathematics, political science, and sociology to submit strategies in the form of computer code.
And for this first round, he got 14 sophisticated programs, plus he added a baseline strategy called random, which just, did whatever. So 15 players in total.
Right. And the format was a round-robin tournament. Each of the 15 programs played 200 moves of the IPD against every other strategy, and also against a clone of itself. So that's 15 times 15. 225 separate games run inside the computer, all to test the robustness of each strategy against the entire field.
The scoring system was fixed. Mutual cooperation got you 3 points. Defecting against a cooperator, the temptation move, got you 5 points. Mutual defection was 1 point. And being the sucker got you 0 points.
So we can set a kind of high watermark here. If any two programs managed to cooperate for all 200 rounds, they would each get a perfect score of 600 points. The goal was to see which program got the most points across all its pairings.
And the result was just a stunning rebuke to complexity, right?
Absolutely. The winning strategy was the simplest one submitted. It came from the game theorist Anatol Rappaport, and it was called tit for tat.
Tit for tat. It's almost absurdly simple. It had 2 rules, and that's it. Rule 1. Cooperate on the very first move.
Always start nice.
And rule 2. After that, just copy whatever the opponent did on their previous move. It's pure, simple reciprocity.
Its success isn't in the score it gets on any single move, but in its ability to foster high scores over time and prevent these long, costly feuds. We should look at how it works in practice, starting with the best-case scenario.
Okay, TFT versus TFT. They both start by cooperating, following Rule 1. Then on move 2, they just copy the other's previous move, which was cooperation.
So they just cooperate forever. They spend 200 rounds in mutual cooperation, each earning the full 600 points, maximum collective efficiency. Beautiful.
Now, what about against a nasty strategy? One designed to exploit softies, to try and steal that 5-point temptation payoff. Let's take naive prober.
Right. Naive prober is basically tit for tat, but it throws in a spontaneous random defection every once in a while just to see if it can get away with it.
So let's say on move 8, naive prober decides to defect, out of the blue. TFT, having only seen cooperation so far, cooperates. So naive prober scores 5 points for temptation, and TFT scores 0 for being the sucker. Looks good for naive prober so far.
It does, for one move. But on move 9, the game flips. TFT, obeying its simple rule 2, copies naive prober's last move, which was defect.
And naive prober, meanwhile, copies TFT's last move, which was cooperate. So the score is completely reverse. Now TFT gets 5 points and naive prober gets 0.
And now they've fallen into a pattern of mutual recrimination, an alternating run of DCCD, DCCD. Over the next few moves, their scores are just flipping between 5 and 0.
So the average score for both of them during this feud is only 2.5 points per move.
And this is the critical insight. 2.5 points per move is significantly lower than the steady 3 points they would both have been getting if they had just kept cooperating. Naive prober tried to steal 5 points, but in doing so, it dragged the average score for both players down for the entire length of the feud.
So TFT's immediate retaliation made the defection unprofitable in the long run.
Exactly. So the goal then is to avoid those damaging cycles of recrimination. The source highlights a slightly more sophisticated program called remorseful prober.
Okay, so this one also defects spontaneously, but it has a longer memory and it actively tries to break out of the retaliation cycle. So after its own defection triggers the opponent's retaliation, it sort of remorsefully lets the opponent have one free hit. It cooperates even when it knows the opponent just defected.
Right. And that little bit of extra forgiveness allows remorseful prober to end that alternating DC cycle much faster than naive prober could. It does better against strategies like TFT than the purely aggressive programs did.
It still scores less than a strategy that is just purely cooperative from the start, like TFT playing against itself.
Yeah.
The damage from that initial defection, no matter how quickly you fix it, still hurts your total score.
That's right. So Axelrod analyzed the features that define success, and he boiled them down to 2 technical attributes. First, being nice.
And a nice strategy is defined as one that is never the first to defect.
TFT is nice. It always starts by cooperating. Strategies like naive and remorseful prober, which throw in those unprovoked defections, are nasty. And it's worth noting that the grudger strategy, which was submitted as freedmen, is also technically nice, since it doesn't start the conflict.
Okay, and the second attribute is forgiving. A forgiving strategy has a short memory. It's quick to overlook old misdeeds. TFT is highly forgiving. It retaliates instantly, but then it immediately goes back to cooperation if the opponent does.
And this is exactly why the grudger strategy did so poorly. It's nice, but it is completely unforgiving. If you betray it once, it will defect forever. It just couldn't break out of those recrimination runs. An opponent slips up once, and grudger punishes them for the next 199 moves, sacrificing any chance for future cooperation and losing tons of points in the process.
So the results of that first round were definitive. The 8 top-scoring strategies were exactly the 8 strategies that were nice.
And the 7 nasty strategies were all at the bottom of the scoreboard. Tit for Tat scored 84% of the maximum possible score. It seems nice guys did not finish last.
They finished first. But here's where it gets even more interesting, with the concept of magnanimity, with a strategy called tit for two tats.
Right, TFTT. This strategy allows the opponent 2 consecutive defections before it finally retaliates.
That's extreme forgiveness.
It is. And Axelrod calculated that if tit for two tats had been submitted to that first tournament, it would have won. And precisely because it's so exceptionally good at absorbing the occasional mistake or random defection without triggering those long, costly cycles of revenge.
So, okay, the initial tournament proved that TFT is robust against this kind of arbitrary pool of opponents. But then Axelrod ran a second tournament. 62 entries this time, and everyone participating knew about TFT's success in the first round.
And this knowledge led to a split in philosophy. Some people submitted even nicer, more forgiving strategies, like tit for two tats. But others reasoned that, well, if everyone else is submitting these softies, I should submit a nasty, sophisticated program designed specifically to prey on them.
And TFT won again. It scored 96% of the benchmark this time. But here's the interesting twist. Tit for two tats, the super forgiver that would have won the first round, got beaten this time. Why?
Because the population mix was different. It now included these subtle, nasty strategies that were designed to exploit that exact kind of softness. It was just too saintly for the new, more complex world it found itself in.
So this confirms a key limitation of just a round-robin competition.
Yeah.
Your success depends on the environment, on who else is in the game.
Right, and to find the truly successful strategy in nature, we have to shift our perspective from robustness, which is being good against any submitted strategy, to the concept of the evolutionarily stable strategy, or ESS.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the ESS framework asks the Darwinian question. What strategy will continue to thrive when it's already numerous in the population? In this model, winnings are offspring. The strategy is now competing primarily against copies of itself.
So Axelrod ran his evolutionary tournament, round 3. He took the 63 strategies from round 2 and set them loose in a simulation where winnings translated directly into reproductive success. The strategies reproduced, and their proportions in the population changed over generations. It was a simulation of natural selection in a closed environment.
And the results were dramatic. Most of the strategies just went extinct really quickly. The nasty strategies, like that exploitative one called Harrington, they had a brief moment of success preying on the soft, forgiving strategies like tit for two tats.
But once those softies were driven to extinction, the nasty strategies, having lost their easy food source, they followed them right into oblivion.
And eventually, a kind of stability was reached. And the population was just overwhelmingly dominated by tit for tat and a few other very similar, nice, provocable strategies. They had proven they were resistant to invasion by the nasty ones.
Yeah, and this is a really crucial technical point, a very dense but vital piece of the analysis. The source points out that tit for tat is not strictly a true ESS. Why is this cooperative equilibrium fundamentally fragile?
It's the indistinguishability factor. So imagine a population where TFT is dominant. Every TFT plays cooperate with every other TFT. They all score 3 points around. Life is good.
Right. In that environment, a totally saintly strategy, let's call it always cooperate, or AC, it can just drift into the population. AC also plays cooperate all the time. Against TFT, AC scores exactly the same, 3 points per round.
So because you can't tell them apart in a nice environment, natural selection has no way to eliminate always cooperate. It can just drift in without any negative consequences.
And here is the danger. While TFT is stable against invasion by nasty strategies, always cooperate is a total open door. If AC becomes numerous, it creates this huge, wide-open soft spot for a ruthlessly selfish strategy like always defect to come in and exploit.
Right. Always defect would play against always cooperate. It would defect every single time, and it would get that high temptation payoff of 5 points per round, while always cooperate gets the sucker's payoff of 0 points.
And always defect would just rapidly increase its frequency in the population, driving down the average fitness of everyone and eventually just destabilizing the entire cooperative environment.
So to reconcile this empirical success of TFT with this technical vulnerability, Axelrod came up with a new term, collectively stable strategy for TFT.
Right. He recognized that the system is what's called bistable. 2 stable points exist. The population can stabilize down in the always defect valley, or it can stabilize up in the TFT-like mixture valley. And once a population gets to one of those stable points, selection tends to keep it there.
Which brings us to the famous knife edge metaphor. We need to understand what controls the flip from one stable state to the other.
There's a critical frequency, let's say, just for the sake of argument, that 5% of the population playing TFT is the knife edge. If TFT is rare below that 5%, it just doesn't meet other TFTs often enough to get the benefits of mutual cooperation.
So selection pushes the population further toward always defect. The few TFT individuals just keep getting the sucker's payoff, and their genes decrease in frequency.
But if TFT can somehow achieve that critical frequency, if it crosses the knife edge, then suddenly natural selection favors it. It meets other cooperators often enough to get the high reward payoff, and selection pushes the population further up toward the cooperative state.
So the big difficulty is initiating cooperation in a population that's already full of selfish defectors. How can a rare cooperative strategy ever get to that critical frequency it needs to cross the knife edge and take over?
Well, the computer simulations showed that cooperation is mathematically stable once it's established, but it really struggled to get a foothold from scratch. So we need a real-world biological mechanism for a rare strategy like TFT to bypass that knife edge and achieve critical mass.
And that mechanism is local clustering. driven by high population viscosity.
Viscosity. In nature, individuals often don't disperse very far from where they were born. The source uses that great analogy of the remote Irish island where almost everyone had the same unusual ear shape. That wasn't an adaptive trait, it was just a result of inbreeding. Genetic relatedness or kinship was just very high locally.
Right, so that viscosity means that individuals who are genetically related tend to live near one another and interact frequently. So if a gene predisposes an organism to play tit for tat, then local clusters of kin will naturally share that gene.
And this gives TFT a massive advantage. Even if the TFT strategy is globally rare, say only 1% worldwide, it might still be locally common. Maybe it's 50% in one small patch of forest because of this clustering.
And these clustered TFT individuals meet each other frequently enough to engage in that mutual cooperation, reaping the benefits from nature and maximizing their fitness.
It acts like a secret passage under the knife edge. The selection pressure based on the global frequency, that 1%, suggests TFT should die out. But the local density allows it to bypass that prediction and start to grow.
And here's the really beautiful asymmetry that ensures cooperation wins in the long term. Local clustering of always defect individuals does especially badly together.
Oh, yeah. They just constantly punish each other. They get the low punishment payoff every single time. Always defect clusters are self-destructive. They gain no help from kinship or viscosity. They don't prosper when they're together.
So even though always defect is a true ESS, it can resist invasion when it's already common. It doesn't have the power of clustering to regain dominance once cooperation starts.
Right. TFT, through kinship and local density, has what the source calls a higher order stability. It has a mechanism to flip a selfish population toward cooperation, but selfishness lacks a similar mechanism to flip it back. The initial difficulty of starting cooperation is overcome by the simple fact that cooperators, especially kin, are just intrinsically good for one another.
So Axelrod introduced one final, very insightful technical term to define these successful strategies: not envious.
Right, and this means a strategy is perfectly happy for the other player to win as much or even more than you do, as long as both of you are winning the most you can from that external source, from the banker.
And tit for tat is fundamentally not envious. Because it never defects first, it can never actually score more than its opponent in a game. The most it can ever do is tie at the highest possible score. It's aiming for collective maximization, not individual domination.
And this really highlights the difference between zero-sum and non-zero-sum games. Zero-sum games, like chess, are pure competition. My win is your loss.
But non-zero-sum games, like the prisoner's dilemma, are about opportunity. We can cooperate to maximize our combined winnings from nature. And the source points out that we humans often fall into a trap here. We succumb to envy, and we prefer to harm our opponent, even if it means a lower absolute score for ourselves, which is, irrational in a non-zero-sum context.
We see this flaw played out all the time in human systems that artificially impose zero-sum rules on situations that are naturally non-zero-sum. The classic example is the dissolution of a partnership, specifically divorce proceedings in an adversarial legal system.
Right. A functioning marriage or a business partnership is profoundly non-zero-sum. And when it dissolves, the couple still has this huge potential to cooperate, especially in minimizing legal fees and maximizing the assets they can keep out of the hands of lawyers. They are partners against the banker, the legal system's costs.
And yet, the very structure of the legal system forces them into an adversarial zero-sum frame. Since a lawyer can only ethically represent one client, the other has to get their own lawyer. And the dispute instantly becomes A versus B, a hostile contest where you have to extract resources from the other party.
And the ultimate irony is that the two lawyers, the appointed adversaries, they're the ones playing a highly profitable non-zero-sum game against the clients. They cooperate by exchanging letters, filing motions, delaying things, all of which are billable hours.
Their professional opposition is, ironically, the chief instrument of their cooperation, maximizing their collective game at the expense of their clients' joint assets. And the clients, fueled by envy and the zero-sum framing, they often encourage this expensive spiral.
You can contrast that destructive scenario with the immediate shift seen in that 1977 English Football League game between Bristol and Coventry.
Right. This was the final day of the season, and it was a zero-sum death match. One team had to be relegated, along with Sunderland. Bristol and Coventry were playing each other, fighting like mad to get a win or a draw to be safe. The game was intense, aggressive, completely zero-sum.
And then, with just 2 minutes left, the external banker magically appeared. News flashes across the scoreboard. Sunderland had lost their match.
And the relegation rules instantly changed. Now, a draw would save both Bristol and Coventry. The game structure had instantaneously morphed from zero-sum competition to non-zero-sum cooperation.
And the behavioral change was immediate and total. The struggle just stopped. The players on both sides secured the 2-2 draw without any contention, just passing the ball amiably. The referee, whose job was to maintain the zero-sum conflict, just watched helplessly as the players mutually cooperated to maximize their combined benefit against the threat of relegation.
Right.
It's a perfect illustration of how fast behavior adapts when the mathematical structure of the game shifts.
And all of this analysis, it leads back to one single defining condition for cooperation: the shadow of the future.
Cooperation only works if the game is iterated. The players have to believe that this interaction is not the last one. The shadow of the future has to be long.
And here's the subtle but absolutely vital technical twist. The game must be long, but it must also be unpredictable. If the players knew exactly when the game would end, say, in 100 rounds, the rational, self-interested logic of the one-shot PD forces defection.
Right. This is because of a logical technique called backward induction. If we know the 100th round is the last one, well, that's just a one-shot PD, so it forces both players to defect. But if the 100th round is predictably a defection, then the 99th round is effectively the new last round that matters.
Which also forces defection. And this reasoning just cascades all the way backward, forcing mutual defection from the very first move.
So the length is less important than the indeterminacy. When a player suspects the game is about to end, they're strongly tempted to defect first to get that high temptation payoff before retaliation is possible.
The longer and more indeterminate the shadow of the future, the nicer, more forgiving, and less envious players will be.
And this brings us to a really compelling and, frankly, moving historical case study. The WWI Live and Let Live system, meticulously documented by the historian Tony Ashworth. This was an unofficial, unspoken, non-aggression pact that just blossomed in the trenches between specific platoons facing each other between 1914 and 1916.
From the perspective of the generals, the overall war effort, the ideal scenario was mutual defection, constant, keen aggression. Mutual cooperation between the two sides was literally treason. It was helping them lose the war.
But for the individual soldier, facing the same enemy platoon for months on end, the outcome of the entire war was sort of irrelevant to his personal immediate fate.
His fate was dictated by the reciprocal relationship with the specific enemy across those 200 yards of no man's land. And the shadow of the future for those dug-in platoons was long and indeterminate. They never knew when they'd be rotated out. This created the perfect microclimate for a tit-for-tat-like strategy to emerge.
The rules of this unspoken pact were enforced by, reciprocal capability and carefully measured retaliation. Soldiers would fire out candles or shoot harmlessly close to the enemy just to demonstrate their deadly virtuosity and their capacity for violence, but avoiding lethal attacks.
They displayed the threat of retaliation, which is that necessary, provocable element of TFT, but they used it very sparingly.
And crucially, there was immediate forgiveness for accidental aggression. The source describes the memoir of a German soldier who climbed onto the parapet after an unexpected barrage from his own side's artillery to apologize to the British, blaming the damned Prussian artillery.
It just highlights the immense motivation among the soldiers to damp down any potential retaliation and quickly get back to the cooperative state. They were playing a game of mutual survival against the true banker, death itself.
And even highly predictable rituals, like the British evening gun, reinforced the pact. The artillery would fire with clockwork regularity at the same spot every evening. To the high command, it looked like aggression and diligence. To the enemy, it conveyed peace and predictability, reinforcing the rhythm of the non-aggression pact.
It was an unconsciously developed, highly effective tit-for-tat strategy, emerging under the most extreme pressure imaginable.
And it is so essential to reinforce that this strategy is defined purely by behavior, not by conscious thought or human emotion. A computer program can be nice, forgiving, and non-envious without a motive, and this applies equally to the living kingdom.
The requirements are simple. A prisoner's dilemma game structure, an external banker providing the winnings, and a long shadow of the future.
So consider the microscopic world. Bacteria, which are certainly not conscious strategists, may play an IPD game with their human host. Normally, the bacteria cooperate, providing harmless or even beneficial services, maintaining the natural microbial balance.
But if the human host is severely injured, say they suffer a catastrophic wound or an organ failure, the shadow of the future for the entire ecosystem of that host shortens dramatically. the host is likely to die soon.
And this acute sudden shortening of the game provides an overwhelming evolutionary temptation for the bacteria to defect, to multiply rapidly, turn nasty, and cause lethal sepsis before the system collapses.
Selection has likely built a purely biochemical rule into the bacteria. Monitor the host's health. If the host's survival probability drops sharply, defect and maximize your immediate reproductive success.
We see similar dynamics in the plant world, even involving what looks like revenge. Fig trees and fig wasps have this intimate, cooperative, symbiotic relationship. The female wasp enters the fig, she pollinates some flowers, that's cooperation, and she lays eggs in others, that's selfish reproductive investment. The tree gets pollinated, the wasp's progeny get food and protection.
The wasp's defection is simple: lay too many eggs and pollinate too few flowers. It exploits the host for maximum reproductive gain while failing to reciprocate the service.
And the fig tree's retaliation is swift and total. If the tree detects that a wasp has defected, it simply aborts the developing fig at an early stage, just cuts off the nutrient supply.
Which causes all of the wasp's progeny to perish, even if they were legitimately laid. It is a perfect biological enforcement mechanism. Plant revenge ensures that only cooperative wasps, the ones who fulfill their pollination duties, succeed in raising their young. The behavior stabilizes the interaction.
Then you have the hermaphrodite sea bass that Eric Fisher studied, which form monogamous pairs. They strictly alternate between the male role, which is cheaper, producing sperm, and the female role, which is costlier, producing eggs. Their self-interest would be to play the cheaper male role all the time.
Right, so cooperation means playing the costlier female role when it's your turn, and attempting to play the male role when it's the partner's turn to be male, or just refusing to be female when it's your turn. That's defection.
And if one partner defects, the retaliation is immediate and effective. The partner refuses to play the female role next time, or just terminates the relationship and looks for a more reliable cooperator.
And Fisher observed that sea-based pairs with uneven sex role sharing were highly unstable. They tended to break up quickly, which confirms that the IPD dynamics are maintaining this strict reciprocal alternation, a simple two-move version of tit for tat.
Finally, we have to return to the fascinating case of the vampire bats, studied by G.S. Wilkinson, which really serves as a powerful capstone to the whole argument.
Vampire bats feed on blood, but it's a feast or famine existence. Some bats come back sated after a successful night, others come back empty and starving, potentially facing death within 60 hours. It's an ideal setup for reciprocal altruism because luck alternates from night to night.
And Wilkinson observed blood donation by regurgitation. While most of the sharing happened along kin lines, mothers feeding their children, there was significant evidence of sharing among unrelated individuals who were just frequent roostmates.
And this is the crucial non-kin dynamic that's necessary to prove the IPD model, because it ensures repeated non-genetic interaction.
The payoff structure is key here. Wilkinson analyzed the rate at which starved bats lose weight, and he determined that the cost of donating blood for a sated donor is actually small. It slightly decreases her chance of survival. But the benefit to a highly starved recipient is enormous. It can prolong its life by several hours.
So the cost to the donor is less precious than the benefit to the starving recipient. On her lucky nights, the donor is tempted to defect and keep all the blood, but she's highly incentivized to cooperate, knowing that on her unlucky nights, her life might depend entirely on the generosity of the same bat she helped before. The payoff structure conforms perfectly to TRPS.
But for a non-kin TFT-like strategy to evolve, the bats have to have a robust way of recognizing individuals. They have to know exactly who they're dealing with to make sure they're not feeding a perpetual cheat.
So Wilkinson designed this clever experiment with captive bats, mixing populations from two distant caves. When a bat was experimentally starved and then returned to the roost, it was overwhelmingly fed by an old friend from its original cave, even though they weren't kin. In one observation, 12 out of 13 donations were given to known roostmates.
That proved it. It proved the mechanism necessary for a reciprocal TFT-like strategy to operate among non-kin. They have the capacity for memory and recognition, allowing them to cooperate with established partners and retaliate against or just reject strangers who have no history of cooperation.
It's a beautiful example.
It really is. So this deep dive has shown that niceness is not some sentimental flaw. It's a rigorous, mathematically stable strategy.
Right. To summarize the essential insights, niceness, forgivingness, and non-envious behavior are highly successful evolutionary strategies. They thrive when the underlying game is non-zero-sum, allowing players to benefit at the expense of an external banker or nature, provided that the game is repeated indefinitely. That ensures a long and crucially unpredictable shadow of the future.
And cooperation might be difficult to start. It needs that initial push from clustering or kinship to cross the knife edge, but once it's established, it's highly resistant to invasion.
Exactly.
We started with that cynical phrase, nice guys finish last. But the mathematics and these meticulous observations of the natural world, from bacteria adjusting their virulence to soldiers maintaining peace in the trenches, they show us a detailed, technical way out of that pessimism.
Consider the creature used as the closing analogy, the vampire bat. Traditionally, it's a symbol of dark forces, selfishness, the ultimate Darwinian nightmare nature read in tooth and claw. Yet the reality is an organism that exhibits complex, stable, non-kin-based cooperation, forming long-lasting ties of loyal blood brotherhood purely through self-interest managed by a reciprocal strategy.
The chapter suggests that if we must have myths, the reality of these creatures and the elegance of the tit-for-tat strategy could form the vanguard of a comfortable new myth. A myth that proves, even with selfish genes at the helm, cooperation can emerge as the winning, stable strategy, ensuring that nice guys can, and often do, finish first. That's a powerful thought to take forward.
We hope this deep dive into the technical elegance of the iterated prisoner's dilemma has given you a compelling and optimistic framework for viewing competition and cooperation in the complex world around you.
Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.